Welcome to the Seagrass Plantation Town Hall meeting to talk about approved plans for the sluiceway repair and proposed beach restoration plan. If you all stand and join me in pledging allegiance to our flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to thank Howard Simons for arranging for the Millville Fire Hall, Ann Sorreo for the screening and the videographer, multiple members for the setup this morning. It was great. I got here a little after 9. Most of the chairs were already set up. I'd like to thank Bob Clemens for his audio equipment and for Tim Linehan to set it up here. Specifically, I'd like to thank Frank Thompson for his untiring efforts on the sluiceway and the beach restoration project. And the de facto project manager from the start, and I want to thank him for all his hard work. It's going to really pay off. We're going to have a presentation by Doug Janik from Sovereign Consulting. I think we'll hold questions until you go through.
That's okay.
Is that all right? Then if you have to go back to a slide.
We can go as we want. It doesn't matter. It's fine.
I think I'd like to go through.
Okay.
All right. A little bit about Doug. He's a natural resources program manager for Sovereign Consulting Incorporated. He's got a MS in biology from Shippensburg University. He's been investigating, assessing, restoring, and monitoring natural resources for more than 30 years. His work includes ecological risk assessment, restoration, resource planning, outreach, and education, and climate change resilience. He's worked as both a consultant and a federal regulator, and is a regional leader in coastal, wetland, and stream restoration, enhancement, and retrofitting, including work related to vulnerability and resiliency associated with climate change. He has been introducing a number of high-interest technologies for coastal stabilization and restoration involving living shorelines. His designs have won the Governor's Delaware Conservation Award in 1998, 99, and 2009. And the 2012 Engineering Excellence Conceptual Award in 2012, and the Honor Award 2015 from the American Council of Engineering Companies in Delaware. In 2015, Delaware Governor Markell presented him with the Delaware Wetland Warrior Award. His resume goes on for 20 or 30 pages, and I won't read all that. We're happy to have you working for us, and we look forward to your presentation. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you for having me here. If anybody has any trouble hearing me, raise your hand, and I'll make sure I get the microphone close.
A little louder.
How's this? All right. Okay. What I'm going to do here, this is going to be about a 20 to 30 minute talk, and instead of just saying what we're planning on doing, I want to explain to you why we're doing it and give some background. We're going to go back to 1963, what this place looked like then, and kind of go through real quick on what's been happening, and that way you understand why this is happening. It makes more sense of what we're trying to do. Just back in here. Get going. Okay. This is the Seagrass Plantation Shoreline. This is essentially the project area. When we first started, this is also the study area. We did our site assessments. Another way of looking at it, this is the coastline we're interested in for the project. This is what's under the ownership and control of the association. Jumping back to 1963, this is kind of what it looked like. We had a nice, long, straight beach coming here. And this here, it was a channel that was built, dug out by the state to connect this water body out here, which was a semi-connected, semi-isolated patch of marsh, wetlands, probably mostly freshwater at one time. But the problem back then is that they were trying to fight mosquitoes. So they wanted to connect us to the bay. They have some kind of flush, prevent stagnation, get more salinity in there, which keeps down the mosquitoes, and also introduce minnows, which eats the larvae. So it's kind of a tactic they used back in the day, and it has some flaws in it, but one of the problems they ran into is that because of the sediment drift coming across, they kept clogging up. And also to get a better understanding and feel for where this actually is, we have a slight overlay of what we have now. This is 55 years later. And see how it changed a lot. And it's wide open now. Now we have homes, we have marinas, we have all kinds of stuff. Your sluice is right here, right where the channel used to be. Let's zoom up a little bit for this. So a closer look. And what they end up doing here, and it looks like in this one around the 60s, they started actually building the sluice. And the way they built it is that the idea of the sluice was to create a continually open channel through there. It wasn't like a bulkhead. It wasn't made to hold weight going in from the outside in. It was made to let the water go through because it was surrounded by land. This still kept clogging in, eventually extended out, and this is what it looks like, again, just doing a little fade over. But what happened was they had to extend that into the water a fairly good distance so that lateral drift wouldn't keep clogging it. They had to go beyond the sediment drift, which is what they end up doing right in here, and extending up. As soon as they did that, it affected the shoreline. Here's the original shoreline edge approximately. You notice to the northeast, you get more shoreline. To the southwest, you have less. That's typical groin jetty phenomena happens, based off the way the flows are. But that's where it all started, right there. Now, let's look at a little more recent. This is 2007. And what happened is you can see in the top part, the sluice is affecting a couple things here. Some sediment was actually coming out of the sluice, and also the lateral drift would come out, hit up there, wrap around, and fill this area in. So you had a real nice beach here for a long time. But also, along your shoreline, you had a constant feed of sedimentation and not a lot of energy to pull it out. So when it got there, it kind of stayed there unless you had a big storm, acute storm event. And this is an important little line here. We're going to come back to it later on, but just you can see where that line goes, just in front of the sluice and down to roughly a little bit west of where your boardwalk is right now, going out to the beach. We'll come back to that. Then we got 10 years later, 2017, we have a failure in the sluice. This supply is no longer there. We have erosion of the beach up here, and this beach is now eroding out as well, and this is even eroding as well, even further. That's the failed sluice. I'm sure you've all seen it one time or another. And also, what's happening, that failure, since now the sluice is not letting water go through, because it's also clogged, is that the main flow of this marsh is going through the breach, parallel to the shoreline until it hits some structure, which is some remnant, either dock or I heard it was an old ramp at one time. It bumps out a little bit, but it wants to go parallel before it goes out, and that's scarring your beach. So right now, this part of the beach, the main problem here is the breach. So how this happened, what caused this? Well, if you look back, this is a little series of going clockwise of aerial photography, and it's might be tough to see, but in a nutshell what's happening is that when you have a big storm, the marsh goes underwater by a couple feet. This is like a hurricane, it's a nor'easter, or a big blowing tide storm, something you have in the wintertime typically, or fall. And what happens is that you have a low spot up the marina. And that's probably where most of the water comes into that marsh. It's through that when you have high water. And what happens is it fills up, but when it recedes, it can't get out there the same way. It's like it's trapped. Usually the sluice will let that out slowly over a period of time. The sluice is all clogged up, so the water finds its weakest point, which is where the breach occurred. So over time, all this energy is coming from inside out. It's hitting your breach, and we're going to show a little blow up of this here. And I put a couple lines in this. This blue line here is what you had 10 years ago where your low tide line was. This is where the back of the dune and the high marsh is starting edge right here back then. Go through the series of Norita, 2009, Sandy, 2012, and the last 2016 and 2017 nor'easters we had in January, which are really tough storms. And what you see is your low tide line has moved closer to land, you got erosion. And this dotted line at the bottom here is basically what's been eroded away from your higher ground. That's what's happening right now. So part of the solution is going to be addressing that breach. The other thing we look at too is other energies that affect. Now we have this, the other part of this main, what I call the high energy beach here, or the eastern beach. This is getting hit the worst. So what we have happening is most of that damage is occurring during acute events that really shake it up, and then the chronic conditions take away the loosened up material. But what happens is during a nor'easter, part of that energy is blocked by landmass and by the sluice. Other parts is going straight down, direct with unabated, hitting the shoreline. We have some overwash here, which causes sluice to basically clog up. During a high storm, this is underwater, or almost underwater. It's splashing over here. So you get a little bit of scar, but not too much. And you get some diffraction that's occurring, which is, diffraction is a curving of energy. It's kind of like when you blow your finger, and there's a candle on the other side, you can blow into your finger, the wind goes around your finger and blows the candle out. Same thing happens with water, with wave energy. It wraps around objects. So this vector is actually bending around here, but it's kind of spreading out to do that. So you have a moderate energy area, and this is my line. Remember we talked about this line earlier? You have a little bit lower energy here, you have higher energy over here, and you can see the erosion patterns on your beach on how that's happening, what's causing that. So moderate, high area, and so these are concerned. So the main thing right now is this area is going to get improved by dealing with the sluice, but this area is not being addressed. So the best thing to do is to deal with energy before it hits the beach. You want those waves to break out in the water. So something in there, putting a low reef out there is the best way, because that way your waves break, and then your beach, which will start recreating itself, will also help as part of a system to break the rest of the energy, so it protects your beach. Now we jump to the other side of the property. This is the western shoreline, and you have that little bump of marsh in here that's getting beat up a little bit. And looking historically, even though it looks pretty tough, it's the rate of horizontal erosion on that part of the beach is not nearly as much as it is at the other part. We're only talking about a half a foot a year on average, which in this part of the bays is not so bad. But there is impact that needs to be addressed so you don't get any worse with that, because this is also protecting structure and everything else. But we have down in the lower part here is we have a remnants of a boat ramp, which was back way before the 60s even. And also, we have a lot of old remnant partial concrete pours. And I'm not sure how they got there. It was probably left over from a pour, and they had to put it somewhere, so they dumped it and ran, thinking they were doing a good thing. This structure keeps that shoreline from moving, but also tends to let energy that does come through here run along it and scour out down in here. So you don't want hard shorelines. You want soft shorelines. You want low slope shorelines ideally. And the other area, the last area is the dock area. We're having some slow erosion happening, but with the bulkhead being put in here, we get energy coming in here, it concentrates, it wraps around the structure. So you have a little bit of increase, and you're going to have more increase here over time. So it's going to get worse. So that's an area we want to do something with too. Nothing major, but something just to kind of stop that from happening before it gets too bad. So that's kind of the background on what's causing the erosion and what's happening. So what are we going to do to fix it? How are we going to help this and make it more resilient?
91, interceptor call, 49 Lake Pine Drive.
So what we decided to do is to break this into 6 phases. They're kind of sequential. They can happen all at once, or they can be broken up. That way, it gives the community more flexibility to address the issues over time. Okay, so phase 1 is the sluice area. But first of all, before we do anything, we have to do some site assessments. We went out there, we collected a lot of topographic data, a lot of bathymetry. We ran cross sections. We delineated habitats. We identified the extent of debris, concrete here, concrete down there, where the marsh is, high tide lines, low tide lines, mean tide lines. And the reason we do all this investigation, collect all this data is twofold. One is we need that for our design. We also need that to get permits to do this work, because agencies require this. So we can't get around it. We make our cross sections, that way it helps us figure out, see what's really going on, and how good the problem is, how bad the problem is, and better characterize the sites. And this way we can see not just plain view, but also a cross-sectional view. We also detail major structures. We detail out what the sluice is, the dimensions, and also the dock. And then we have areas of special interest, like the sluice area. We'll do blow-ups and collect a little more intense level of data. Again, this is for us to do our design, also for agencies to understand what's going on here. So now we get into design. We're back to our areas. Talk to phase one. It's the sluice. Now, one of the things about this, when they did the mosquito, the sluice there for this, they didn't go through the detailed effort and didn't have the knowledge back in the 60s that we have now. And when you do, the calculations, the amount of water that can go through that sluice is about less than a quarter of what the marsh needs to really flush properly. It also has a standard amount of flow throughout that, where a healthy marsh during high tide has its highest flows going in and out. During the low part of the tide cycle, that flows almost to a trickle. That's the reason why that happens. It's healthy is because low flows gives you low energy, and that's where the water energy is closest to the substrate. When you have deeper water, the energies tend to be more toward the top of the flow, and that way the marsh is protecting itself by deeper water, higher energy, shallower water, lower energy. So currently, that breach is about 10 or 11 feet wide, the main part of the breach. It needs to be about twice that. And what's happening is, because it's not wide enough, it needs to get the volume through. So what it's doing is actually it's digging itself deeper, trying to make allow more volume to go through there, which is not what you want to do in a marsh. So we have to control that. So what we did is we actually modeled and sized, based on the size of the marsh, the proper size of that channel. We're going to use this breach and make it the permanent, instead of trying to deal with the sluice, which right now is too low for design. It's not large enough, and it's financially just unfeasible to maintain that for any of the communities around here, is to use that opening as the new marsh opening. But not just doing that, and be sized correctly so that it controls the energy, but also by building a structure that goes and angles out into the bay, we prevent that opening from running parallel to the shoreline. So we're going to stop the shoreline erosion in doing that, and allow this area, once again, to fill up and become more of a beach again. So we're only talking coming out about, from the sluice, an angle about 40 feet. It's not real far. It's just enough to get it past a point, and that way it will take, and then it will cut its own channel going through there. What it also does is that it also, the added benefit, which it's not important for the community necessarily, but for the marsh it is that it's going to prevent some of this erosion that's happening right here. It's going to have an angle coming in here. It's already cut out. So it's going to slow down any kind of impacts to the marsh.
103, difficulty breathing, 29725, Springwood Drive.
So when we do that, and then what these designs are showing is, this is a cross section going this way. And this is a control structure. It's between this new channel control we're going to have. And what that does is, this is the proper dimension you want the channel to be in. Wide and shallow. And by having this feature there, what it does is it will give the channel a permanent guideline on its dimensions it wants to be. And already, I'm going to go back one slide, a couple slides real quick, just to show you the, it's actually down here. Back to these cross sections. Okay, this is not the actual where the breach is. This is just in front of the breach, about 10 feet or so. See how deep that is? You go out another 15, about 20 feet, and see how that changes all of a sudden because that restriction is eliminated. This is what it naturally wants to be, more of that shape, shallow and wide as opposed to deep and narrow. So when we make a structure, we're going to control that. We're going to make sure it stays that way, so that way it can continue into the marsh that way. Go through this here. Just catching up to where we were. Okay, and this is just some more details on that feature. And then what this is that this is going to basically have some whalers going across here down to the sand. We're going to basically put a liner, put some river run stone, which is smooth stone, so there's nothing sharp out there. And then we're going to put some shell bag on either side, mostly bury the shell bag, and then we have this nice, shallow, gradual thing. This actually can be walked across when it's all said and done, or in front of it. So it gives you some kind of ability to get over there now, too. The other part of this is that of this phase, there's three other parts actually. One part is from the structure, we want to bring a little toe here. This is going to be just shell bags, real simple. And what's going to happen is, this is a little toe, because we're going to put some sand back here. We're going to bury all these tiebacks under sand so there's no health safety hazard, and it's going to look more about the beach like it used to look. And this just holds it in nicely. Also, the debris pile of concrete back here, part of the scope is to remove that. That's going to be taken away. And some of that's going to go into this back part of the sluice that's exposed. Right now, that's a safety hazard. Having kids, grandchildren come back in here, they're playing, they get too close, they fall, and no one even knows it happens. It's a hazard. So we're going to basically fill it in a little bit, then we're going to put some sand, and we're going to plant it. So it's going to look like marsh. Instead of being water standing there in a hole, there's going to be grass growing there, marsh grass. So that's what phase 1 would entail. Now, for phase 2, we went through a lot of discussion with phase 2. This is the reef part we're talking about. If you remember this diagram we had before. And we went through 6 alternatives. 2 alternatives is more of an oyster cast or shellbag reef. It's the bottom end of it. It's below the Chevy of design. And that was quickly dismissed. And we showed that 2 different positionings. And then we went with the wave attenuation devices, which is concrete structures that are designed to break wave energy. They've been used around the world. And one's a 3.5 foot size, one's a 2.5 size at different configurations. And one of the things we look at is like, okay, what's the benefit, the pros and cons? So, and I put together a real quick, this isn't all the things we consider, but this is some of the big ones. The very top is average visibility. Visibility is an aesthetic element, and it's grouped in what we call our ecosystem services, which is a fancy way of saying, how does the community benefit or enjoy natural circumstances, whether it be bird watching, kayaking, it could be some kind of recreational fishing, that type of stuff. But visibility, aesthetics is a big one for any of this stuff. Any kind of reef you have out there is going to be, even though it's going to be below the mean low tide line or at the mean low tide line, you're still going to see some of it sticking out of the water. There's no way around it, because if you don't have it high enough, it's not going to break the waves sufficiently to protect the beach. Whether it be stone, whether it be these structures, these wads, or some other kind of structure, you're going to have some visible. So that's a trade-off for protection of the beach. Now, we look at this, we look at some different ways. Now, we can look at mean high tide. What are we going to see? At mean high tide, even the highest one, which will be this one right here, shallow, 3.5 feet high, will just be under the water. At mean low tide, you'll be anywhere from ½ a foot exposed to 2.4 feet exposed of the structures. These structures, this is for 3.5 foot high structure. And also, rough estimate on how much during the daily tide cycle, how long you're going to see either an inch to a couple feet of it, how much you're going to see, and the numbers are significant. So during most of the tide cycle, you'll see some of the structure. There's no way to hide that, no way to address it, no way to change that. You're going to see it. We also look at relative protection. This is real important. How well does these structures protect? And this is a scale of 1 to 10. It's a relative scale compared between structures. And it's somewhat subjective, but what you look at, first of all, how well do they dampen waves during different storm events, whether it be a common storm, a 10-year storm event, a 50, 100-year storm event, what have you. And also, we look at, it's not just a structure, but how does it work as in the system? Because these structures help to create beach too. So once you put them in and over the next couple of years, your beach should expand because it helps to create material behind it. So that's part of the system, because your beach also helps to dampen wave energy. So when you look at the first wave events, which would be the structural component, then the beach protects, then the dune protects, another step. So it's a system of protection of multiple things that protect you when you have a storm. So that's what this addresses. You notice the 2, 3.5 foot ones are really close, almost identical, and that was a wash. And then these lower ones drop down a lot. That 1.5 foot difference in height makes a huge difference on the amount of protection it can give you, especially when we're talking waves during storm events. And also, with sea level rise, that's the other thing, the other big carrot in the sky there, where we want this to work more than 5 or 10 years. You want this to work for your generations, and then your kids' generations, and so on. So you want something that's resilient and persistent. And so you need height to do that. The other part here, which is, get this out of here. is the what I call the maximum estimate beach width. When you look at certain heights, topography, slopes, and everything, you can and also what's happened, past performance on other sites, you can get a pretty good idea on what the maximum potential of how much beach growth you can have with this structure. And these, and you can see they vary based off of the various situations. It's height and it's how far from the beach you are, and also the beach bathymetry. There are the three main factors that really address this. So you can see that the higher ones can give you more, can have potential to bring more beach out. And these are linear distances from the mean high tide line going back toward the channel. So you can actually potentially get 50, 60 feet of beach could potentially regrow back over a number of years. The trick with this is how quick, because it's weather driven. If we have a big storm event, we get more sediment put back there, and it goes quicker. If we have small storms, it takes longer. If we have big sediment loads coming across, that's quicker. If we have clear water with fine or low sediment loads, then that takes longer. So those variables, that's a huge $100,000, $200,000 model to give you accurate stuff on that, which is not worth doing. It's going to accrete. The question is how many storms we need to do it. So, too fast. I must have hit my my thing here. And the last couple of things here is, one is permit-related costs and fees. If it happened today, these are fees that would be tied to it, and also construction costs. In between these, you have about $10,000 range between the two. So, in between the two better ones, it's a $4,000 range, and we all considered it's a no-brainer, whichever way you go, because it's essentially a wash when we think about it. It's only a few percent difference. So what we came up with is using a 300-foot wads farther out to get the maximum benefit of everything. Another thing I'd like to point out too is that when you're standing on the beach and you have an extra, this is about 30 feet beyond the other option, about 25 feet back there. That makes a big difference. You may not realize, but an extra 25 feet is like me to the van, roughly. Having something farther away like that makes the object look much smaller and less noticeable. It makes a big aesthetic difference having it farther out, so I just wanted to point that out. Phase 3, it's the second reef on the west side here. The idea of this is to protect this corner here, prevent scouring, and also to allow any restoration here to occur. This is real simple. This is lower energy. This doesn't get the exposure from the nor'easter storms. This is just getting softer western storms. Most of these happen during the summer. Occasionally you'll get winter inland storm coming up, but they're not as intense. So you don't need anything as strong or as severe. And this is a lower reef too. So so this you won't see. This will be at or below being low across the board. So this is almost invisible. You'll see a shadow for the most part, and that's about it. And it's a double array coming in here to break up the wave energy and protect this area. Nothing real tricky. It's basically oyster castles, which is a glorified chimneys block. It's cinder and shell bags, which are cabled down and anchored in. Then we jump to phase 4, which is the dock. Again, real simple solution. We put a little toe in here, put some sand here to raise it up to the proper elevation to get vegetation. And what we would do is, that would be protection there, higher, gentler slope, have vegetation which also protects from wave energy, dampens wave energy, and then you have a little beach behind it. So you have improved aesthetics, improved function, improved stabilization, real simple, real cheap to do. Phase 5 is relatively simple, because remember we said that this wasn't eroding at a quick rate, but it was still eroding. So we want to basically put enough natural structural elements in there to stop that undercut. Because what happens is basically the marsh platform gets undercut and then it collapses on itself, and it keeps doing that, and then eventually it washes away. So if we can prevent energy from doing that undercut, which means we only have to have something about a foot high next to the shoreline, that protects that undercut from happening. Marsh is much more resilient. And phase 6, which is the last one, deals with this other debris pile, which is concrete, there's bricks, there's wood ties out there, there's all kinds of stuff going out there, and it's it's not utilized, it's not functional, either for a community basis or for ecology. So we thought that we could bring equipment in there, break that concrete up in smaller units, spread it out, put a layer of natural material on top of it, revegetate it, take rid of the eyesore, take rid of the hazards, and make it functional, and tie this into the existing marsh next to it. And that also stabilizes the shoreline. This is contingent on the Phase 3 reef. Without that reef, this design will probably work, but I couldn't guarantee it because there'd still be a little too much energy for something like this. You'd have to do a little more work. So they kind of all work together in the system that we talked about. And that's in a nutshell what we're proposing to do. So.
Robert Harrison. Isn't everything after Phase 1 really supposition at this point until we find out what that hydrology is going to be from the new sluice coming out? Because this is going to interfere with some of the energy coming in, and I think it was Phase 3 or 4 on the curl around that we're really putting a jetty in that's not counter to any of the energy that's coming ashore, that we were parallel to it looked like. But yeah, I think after Phase 1, we need to wait and see what happens, don't we?
We designed Phase 1. We designed it to work with Phase 2. The angle of that bulkhead work at the breach angles it so beyond that. The toe, the beach replacement, actually connects into the actual tie into that reef. So it's designed to work together. So we don't have to wait for that. That's not going to be an issue. When you first design something like that, the first thing I have is, like you said, it gets out that sluice and tries to go lateral again. And what we don't want to happen is to have that channel flow to curve behind the reef, the landward of the reef, because that's just going to create a scour zone and it's going to direct it right into that little bump of marsh we have. So, use the angle we have, the distance we extended it, and the positioning of the reef, and also that little toe where we're going to do the nourishment is going to keep that. Also, you have some structure out there already. You have remnant pilings and some concrete actually in there below grade right now out there. So that also is going to help that from making that cut. That's why I showed that picture of the channel coming out right now. Hits that and is bumping out, that one photograph I had. Well, it's already happening naturally. So we're just going to add more to that. So the idea is that we want that channel is going to go out at an angle straight out to the bays, and we're basically eliminating that horizontal flow. Now, so Phase 2 and Phase 1 will work together. As far as the other phases, they're independent of Phase 1 and Phase 2. They're made to basically protect a lower energy system and erosion on the west side of the community, of beach shoreline there. So really, you have, it's a whole separate energy paradigm, basically. It doesn't get the nor'easter energy over there. It gets a little bit of wraparound, a little bit at the fraction, but not much. So most of the energy is coming from the west for that side. So they're independent of one another. So that's not going to have an issue. It's just, but we did have to make sure in design, we had to make sure that we didn't have any problems with Phase 2 interacting with Phase 1 negatively. So that was one of the first elements we incorporated when we were doing design, is make sure that wasn't going to happen. That curve in the Phase 2 at the end there, that also helps prevent that as well. That little bit, one's going to stop and then no one picks up. So they're made to work in tandem.
Dave Grimshaw. I have two questions actually. One would be, what's the worst case scenario if we do nothing?
The worst case scenario if you do nothing is that your beach in that high energy area will continue to roll over itself, and eventually that's going to break through, connect that small marsh, and then the houses behind there will be basically inundated during storms much more than they were before. Also, you will continue to lose beach on the eastern side of that high energy zone where the sluice is. The sluice is going to dig a deeper channel there, not much, but a little bit deeper, and it's going to be uncontrolled. So you're going to be your beach is not going to be real functional at that point, and that's the big issue.
And my second question is, the modifications to the sluice, what impact does that have up the creek? Because I live up the creek, and I mean, at low tide, it seems like it's gotten wider up there already.
Yep.
So what will the modifications do to the creek?
Actually, what it's going to do is that one reason why you're getting the wider is because it's impounding water. It's getting what we call waterlogged because it can't get out right now sufficiently. And that's why it's digging down deeper at the breach. by making it properly sized, when you have the normal flush will be balanced, so you're not going to. So the marsh actually get healthier, and when you have a big storm, which is where a lot of problems happen, is that it's not going to be held in there. It's going to get out there much quicker. Normally, when you have a big storm, the water recedes in 1 or 2 cycles, instead of being stuck in there for days sometimes. So it's going to actually improve the situation up the top side. The water will drain out better and quicker, so you're not going to have less chance of flooding, and also you have a better flush. So right now, back in the 60s, you had a mix of brackish, even freshwater species up that far up before they made the connection. And depending on the situation, it's been transitioning into more of a salt marsh than what it was originally back in the 60s. And this is going to make that marsh healthier, so you would actually be able, and also you'll get more accretion back there naturally in the sedimentation. Ideally, the marsh will come back a little bit, or be able to compete better with sea over rise. Right now, it's too much water there, and it's just drowning out slowly.